So unfortunately, I somehow did not record class today, January 27th. So I'm going to redo it for those who weren't here and go over some of the same things, and it will be a little different, and but that's just the way it is. So I wanted to make sure that everybody understands what I'm asking for you if you are in the 9U1 section. If you are in the 9U section, you have the option of either attending at the regular class time or watching the recording and doing some kind of follow-up activity. And I've just come up with this new activity, and that is to basically complete a form. This is to make sure you're staying up to date and actually watching the recordings as they come along, and also that you get some level of engagement. We're actually going to be doing some interaction on Blackboard through blogs and discussions. So you will actually get some interaction with other people in the class. But at least you'll get, if you watch the recording and fill out the form, you'll at least get some interaction with the content and with me. The reason why I'm doing this is I'm seeing that those of you who are in the 9U section aren't actually doing the assignments as they're coming along. And so I've started getting worried about how to keep you engaged and keep you accountable. So I'm going to go to Blackboard. I don't want that, I want that. All right, so, and I will put this link on the side on the navigation menu, but it's going to look like this. You fill in the class date. You say if you've watched the recording or not. If you write no, the next thing you'll say get is please go watch the recording now and come back to answer the questions. But if you do watch the recording and you answer yes, you'll go to this, and I have 3 questions to ask you, and basically they're just to make you think a little bit about what you watched and what your understanding is. You should try to think a little more. This is more than just a yes/no question. These should be some thoughtful responses that show that you're engaged with the content and with the reading. The deadline for you to finish these for the first 2 classes, it's going to be for Monday, February 1st. And for every subsequent class, it's going to be for the next, before the next class that you have. So the next class that we have is Monday, February 1st. And so it should be completed for today's class by noon on February 1st. Speaking of deadlines, the schedule will get a little more vague as we go along, but I'll add the specific assignments. There was an assignment due today. It is a preliminary opinion piece in Blackboard blog. If you're not sure what that is, then be sure you pay attention to when I talk about it during the January 20th and January 25th classes. The blog is set up. You can find the blog over on the course menu. The blog is set up, drafting and revision of persuasive argument. So you can see other students and you are able to comment on them. What you do is when you go into the blog, to the right of the instructions is your name. Here I'm called the preview user. Don't worry about that. And you see here the students who have completed the blog. And you can go in there and read it. And what these icons mean are that the little thumbtack means it's a new entry. And if somebody has made a comment on it, there's new comments. And so there are 11 people in the class, and so far only 6 have actually completed it. The assignment itself tells you when it's due, as well as the schedule, which we looked at before. It says complete by class time on Wednesday, January 25th, worth 15 points. Any kind of Blackboard tool, I will try to put a rubric in. A rubric always looks like this 6-part grid. You click on it and there it is. And you should take a look at it to see what the expectations are. This index, I think we'll see it better. These things are going to be indexed by month. So when February hits, you'll also see under index a February line as well as a January line. Don't panic if you're there on February and you can't see the post that you did in January. Just go back up to the index here. And one of the things that the students in the synchronous class asked about was how do you share a Google Doc on the blog. Let's go back to mine. If you have a Google Doc, I want to share it. Right now, the default is private only to me, but if I want to share it with somebody, I have 2 options. I can add an email. So I could share it with my department chair, Joyce Locke Carter. ULR is connected. ULR's email is a Google email or a Gmail. It's their corporate version. And so all the ULR emails will come up if you type it in. And so in almost all cases, if you know the name of a person, you'll be able to get their email working within Google Docs. But you can also just get a link and share it. And there are 3 different options for sharing. You can make it restricted, which is the default, and that means that only people who get an actual email invitation can look at something. You can do anyone with a link, which is very broad, anybody who, and they don't have to be at ULR. What I do is, and what you should be doing for everything for a class, is only people that are at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. This should not be something that goes out on the broad web. So in addition to who you can give access to, that is individual people, anyone, or ULR people, you have three choices for how to, what type of access you give them. If you give them viewer access, all they can do is look at it. They can't put any comment on it. They can't download it. They can't, I think it depends on whether they can download it. If you put comment access on it, then they can add comments to it. And if you put editor access, you can, they can do anything that the owner can do. I think I will do this as that. Now I'm given access to anyone at ULR with a link. So I'm going to copy the link. Now I'm back here in my blog. I'm going to practice. Here is my Google Doc, and the Blackboard ruler gives all sorts of options. Let's say we are going to share it through making a link on the words Google Doc. What you do is you select the words you want to share it to. You click on the picture of the link, and then you paste the URL. Remember, I copied the URL from the share button. And this should end up and you then can click, and there you are getting it. So for this assignment, you can, as I said, you can either post a link to your Google Doc, or you can cut and paste from your Google Doc. If you're cutting and pasting, be sure that you still have the Google Doc. I want you to keep the Google Doc and keep working on this same Google Doc so that you can work with the different versions. If you get stuck with Google, over on the course menu, you have Google Resources, a couple documents that I've created about how to use Google, ULR's support page on Google, and Google Help itself from the Google company. So if you have other questions, remember that there is an assistance forum over in the discussions, and you can always ask me a question. And actually, if you ask a question, chances are everybody else will have similar questions. And that's why I prefer you to put your questions into this discussion board rather than ask me individually. I will, it's not that I don't want to talk to you individually, but I also, I want everybody to become, to help each other in what you're doing. If you're not sure when things are due, you can go to my grades. Unfortunately, my grades doesn't tell you the time, but the assignment itself did. Assignment itself said complete by class time on Wednesday, January 27th, work 15 points. But the My Grades will tell you when it's due. It says due January 27th. And it has the rubric, just like I showed you over there before. I also see, this is to go back to this sort of institution website. There is a calendar and I'm not really sure why all these old dates are still on it. I'm going to try to get rid of them. But here you see on January 26th, there are 3 dots. And said 2 items due. And these are for all 3 of my classes. But here is your class. And it tells you that the actual due gives you the actual time. It's always hard knowing with 12, but it was 12 noon. Wouldn't let me say actually 12:15. So that was from this big Blackboard menu. And of course, another place to find out is to look at the schedule. So we look at the schedule, and we just did look at it a minute ago. Here is the blog piece that was due. And if you see, that's week 2. If you see in week 4, you're going to be applying the ideas from the next week to your opinion piece in Blackboard blog. And that will be due in 2 weeks on February 8th. Next week, we are going to start working with rhetorical analysis, the textbook for the class. And I know a few people don't have the book yet, so I have attached a PDF, and my Xeroxing is not that great, but it'll be good enough to get yourself through. I actually also have included that in the week 2 activities, where we have the video of the class, the slideshow from the class, the chat from the class. These are all from Monday. Here's the blogs assignment. Which is we've already looked at. And then here, chapters 1 and 2 from rhetorical analysis. When I get this recording recorded, I will add this to the week 2 material, as I'll be doing that throughout the semester. Going back to the course schedule, so next week we will start working with the textbook, and we'll be talking about Kairos and the rhetorical situation. There's no writing assignment due. The following week, week 4, February 8th and 10th, we'll be continuing to talk about Kairos and also adding a talk about genre. And we'll be, as I said, applying the ideas of Kairos and genre to the opinion piece in Blackboard blog. This box continues that week. So that week 4. At the end of week 4, will be the first quiz. It will be basically on chapters 1 and 2 and other things that I've talked about in class. It will be available from Thursday, February 11th through Sunday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. It is open book, and it is, the assumption is that you will have read the sections and that you will have participated in class so that you will feel, so that it would be basically easy to do. It basically, and also will ask you there will be some just making sure that you read the book and attended class, sort of some easy content questions. And then there will be questions asking you to think a little bit more about the ideas. This structure of having it available from Thursday through Sunday towards the end of when we're working on a certain concept, that's basically what we'll do throughout the semester. Let's see if there's anything else. And if you look at the schedule, and I urge you to do that, you'll see that basically we have the same kind of process schedule as the semester goes on. Then later we'll apply the ideas to your block of argumentation. Then I'll ask you to pick something for rhetorical analysis. And this argumentation unit will be done in week 8. And so Thursday through Sunday of that week, we'll have the second quiz, et cetera, et cetera. It'll basically be the same process throughout the semester. And I find that it's helpful to me to sort of stay on task and organized. So let me talk about what where we are right now. So this course is called Theories of Rhetoric and Writing. We've been talking a lot about what rhetoric means and kind of the negative consequences, the negative terminology, the negative connotations to the word in everyday use. I think with theories, there's a negative connotation as well. People will say, oh, that's just a theory, that's your opinion, that's not true. And so the theory is sort of juxtaposed to something that's true or factual. In the class, I actually took a pause at this point to ask everybody to type on the screen and think about what were some of the meanings that people had for the word theory. And we got a general accepted idea about a subject, an idea that are meant to explain an occurrence, a system of logic that attempts to explain an entity, phenomenon, or concept. So we have two of these answers actually have to do with explaining, and I think that's a really good way to think of theory. Theory is a framework, system of logic, sort of a way of looking at things that includes terminology, that allows you to put facts into some kind of context, and so that you can explain it or perhaps predict the future. So one of the things I did last week, on Monday, was I wanted to give you all a little introduction to theories about what makes rhetoric good. And so what I did was I used the theory that you probably all know, the theory of the rhetorical triangle, or we could take it it's called the pistes. We'll read about that in chapter 3. What Aristotle called the 3 ways to appeal to your audience. And what they do is each of those ways connects to one of the angles in the triangle. So at one point of the triangle, we have the speaker or the writer, and you'll find that the textbook calls that person the rhetor, so that it can be both speaker and writer. And the type of appeal that focuses on the speaker or writer or the rhetor is ethos, the character of the speaker. The message or the reasoning, the logic within an argument, so you convince people by the logic and the content of your argument, is related to the actual content of the argument, and that appeal is called logos. And then the third point of the triangle is audience, and and pathos is the type of appeal that focuses on the audience. So I took that theory of logos, ethos, and pathos, and I said, well, maybe I can use that theory as a way to understand ways to define good rhetoric. So I thought, there is one definition of good rhetoric as from Quintilian, who is a Roman philosopher, who said that an orator is a good man speaking well. So the focus on what makes that rhetoric good, as opposed to all those negative things we've been talking about before, is that the writer has a good ethos. A second type of way of talking about good rhetoric might be to focus on rhetoric that the subject matter is done well, meaning that it is logos based and there's evidence, there's reasoning, it's true. The Eon article from last week, which is a great article to think about the content of the rhetoric. And the author basically makes a theory that rhetoric can be good because it can get people to think. And just, I mentioned in class on Monday, an interesting thing about Plato. He didn't really like rhetoric in some ways, but he particularly didn't like writing as opposed to oral communication. And the trouble he had with writing was that it was too silent. That is, that it just was inert, it just stood there. And the audience could not interact with the writing. And so the audience became passive. And I think that's kind of an interesting way of thinking how you can, when you're speaking, can be more of an interaction. Does that mean speaking is always going to be better than writing? No, obviously not. But we have to work to create that relationship between the writer and the speaker. And the third theory about good rhetoric, I thought about when I heard Biden in his speech on last Wednesday talk about St. Augustine. And he said, St. Augustine argues that we know who the community is if we know what the community values. And that's part of his rhetorical theory, because what he's ends up saying is that when you are speaking, when you're using rhetoric, it is good if you are appealing to the audience values, or if you are, at least you know what their values are and you're inspiring them to better ones. So that's all a theory. And here's again a summary of what I said. That is, theory is often juxtaposed to fact. And I think it is related. It is what we do with the facts. It helps us understand the facts. And basically, it's a framework for giving a name to something or explaining and predicting it. So if you have the theory of logos, ethos, and pathos, and you're listening to a speech, then you can ask yourself, well, which type of persuasive appeal does this author use, or does this, or speaker, does this speaker use all three, and how does the speaker use them? I wanted to stop and mention something about the difference between scientific theory and humanities or social science theory. We know in our current society, there's a lot of debate about several theories. One of them, for example, is evolution. And the majority of the scientific community thinks, well, gosh, that there is enough evidence that shows that evolutionary theory is the best way to explain how humans developed and changed on Earth, and how actually the whole Earth developed and changed. As you know, there is a countervailing theory called creationism, and that theory says, no, it didn't take all that long, and humans did not evolve from other species. Rather, God created them and put them in the Garden of Eden. There's actually two different versions even in the Bible. So, we are still in a kind of slightly argumentative kind of mode over evolution versus creationism. We're in a more argumentative mode as a culture on the theory of global warming and not global warming, and whether global warming is caused by human conduct, or whether it's not caused by human conduct, or whether global warming is happening or not. But the general trend in a scientific theory is towards trying to find the better explanation, the better theory, the theory that explains the most facts, predicts the best. And so we can end up saying that this is a true theory and not just somebody's opinion. You all are very familiar with the theory of Galileo that the Earth revolves around the sun, and we're part of a larger universe, and the Earth is just some tiny little speck in this cosmos. And before Galileo, the theory that everybody accepted was that we were a flat Earth, and that the Earth was the center of the universe, and that you could find pictures that showed that. Certain facts, like, for example, the fact that a ship in the horizon keeps just getting smaller and smaller and smaller until they disappear, suggested it wasn't just the end of the Earth, that it wasn't a flat thing, but maybe it was in fact something that was round. It's pretty hard it's easy for us to think about a round Earth now. It's just part of our understanding. But at the time, it was something that was just probably pretty hard to accept. And so, people died. There were a lot of conflict until we got to a better understanding of that theory, and pretty much everybody, except for a few unusuals, people accepted that as the true theory. Now, when we get into theories in humanities and social sciences, like in rhetoric, we're not ever going to find the true theory of rhetoric, because human action, human behavior, human thinking is just, it's different than the physical world that those scientific theories were trying to decide. Humans are just infinitely complex. And so the humanities theories, like rhetorical theories, these, we're not ever going to be thinking about, what is the theory that is the right theory. What we're always going to be thinking about is, what theory helps us understand something better. And that's, basically the criteria that we'd be working towards. An interesting part of, from your perspective as writers, is going to be, what is the role of theory in helping you become a good writer? And I've had students who said, learning all this theory was just like a, opening of the mind. And, I could be much more conscious and intentional about what I was doing as I was writing. I've had other students who say that learning all these theory, these concepts, this analytical kind of way of talking about rhetoric and writing, it just gets in the way and it interferes with my creative processes. And there is no right answer there. So what should be one of the things that we think about as the semester progresses. How helpful is it to you as a writer? Now, I know theories will be helpful to you in trying to understand rhetoric that you read or consume or are bombarded with in the outside world. So there, that analytical approach for sure should be helpful, because it gives you framework, terminology, and sort of concepts that put things in relationship to each other. So my next slide is another theory. Aristotle had a theory of rhetoric, and basically he said, rhetoric is the available means of persuasion. This is a little difficult concept for modern people, because we're not interested in just persuasion. And in fact, more modern views of rhetoric are that it's the available means of communication, of how do we, what are the resources that we can have to use to communicate more or less effectively with a particular audience in a particular context. And his theory, I think, is still useful if we think about this phrase, available means. So he's talking about, what are the tools that we use to persuade or to inform or to get opinion across. I've been thinking, there isn't a word for rhetoricalness, so it's kind of an unwieldy word. I'll have to come up with, see if there's some other term I can use. But basically, there are these available means, and we use some for some contexts and some for others. We might tell a story that would tear at somebody's heartstrings, or we might explain the logic of something, or in a writing thing, we might use headings to emphasize certain things. I was reading today an interesting book by philosopher George Kennedy called Classical Rhetoric in a Christian Secular Tradition. And I thought he had a really good example that kind of helped you see how writing or any rhetorical act can be more or less rhetorical. It's kind of more on a continuum. So he said, the ancient world commonly thought of this purpose as persuasion, but meant by this something much looser and more inclusive. Purposes cover a whole spectrum. I'm going to continue reading on the book. From converting hearers to a view opposed to that they previously held, to implanting a conviction not otherwise considered, to the deepening of a belief in a view already favorably entertained, to a demonstration of the cleverness of the author. I think that's kind of an interesting one. To teaching or to exposition. In practice, almost every communication is rhetorical in that it uses some device to try to get to affect the thought, actions, or emotions of an audience. But the degree of rhetoric varies enormously. And here's the example. The white pages of the telephone directory are relatively non-rhetorical. Their one common technique is alphabetization. And except for occasional flashes of bold type, their author does not work to influence a reader to call one number rather than the other. The yellow pages, on the other hand, are distinctly more rhetorical, seeking to make an effect upon the audience and using a variety of devices of emphasis to do so. And so I don't know if any of you even seen white pages and yellow pages anymore, but the yellow pages, not only are they more colored by yellow, but they are a lot, they often are actually themselves printed in color. There are a lot more graphics. There's a lot more bold, different use of different fonts. And you're always trying to call attention to your service so that you will convince people to do something. And so to hire them or attend their retail establishment. So what are some of the means of persuasion in a yellow book? Well, there's color, there's different shapes, there's bold, there's different levels of headings, there's different text sizes, there's different how things are categorized. So there are a whole range of things that are in this very simple thing that you wouldn't necessarily even think of as rhetorical actually are doing. Now, on the one hand, the white pages is very minimal rhetoric, minimal means of persuasion. And then on the other hand, a speech during a campaign is a much more extensive means of persuasion. I'm going to reread again what he said. In practice, almost every communication is rhetorical in that it uses some device to try to affect the thoughts, the emotions, or actions of an audience. One final theory I'm going to introduce is the 5 canons. Cicero, a Latin rhetorician about the time of Quintilian, he said that in talking about rhetoric, we can talk basically about sort of 5 different stages or sort of parts of it. Invention being where you're coming up with the idea, arrangement, where you organize it, style, that is how the language that you use to deliver it. Memory and delivery are 2 that don't seem to have that much to do with written rhetoric, but it's important to think about them as well. Memory, if it's oral rhetoric, you have to memorize it. because at the time of earlier classical rhetoric, writing was just barely being introduced. And there was not the technology for writing that later enabled reading and writing to become so important and popular. There was no way to print things, so everything that was written had to be handwritten on, earlier times on very hard surfaces, gradually on sort of paper-like surfaces with ink. But it was a very time-consuming process, and there was minimal education, minimal literacy. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because the textbook basically uses these canons to structure the book, and at least the first parts that we're going to be reading. So that the first chapter is an introduction, and the second chapter is about kairos, which is a topic that that Plato and Aristotle didn't talk too much about, but some of the other rhetoricians called the sophists did, and we'll talk about that next week. But so chapter 3 is called argumentation. And chapter 3 is the chapter that deals with invention. That is, how do you invent your argument, the substance, the meat of your rhetorical piece. Chapter 4 is about organization or arrangement, and chapter 5 is about style or style. So we're going to be working with those chapters. There's actually, that's only half the book, and but we just won't have time to work with some of the other parts of the book, though you can notice that logos, pathos, and ethos are used to structure the later chapters. They don't have a chapter for memory and delivery, but memory and delivery are certainly incorporated in their discussion as they go along. Delivery, I think, is an interesting thing because now we have so many different media for delivering a piece of communication that I think delivery is now becoming a very important kind of thing. So that's where we are. Let me go back here. I want to remind you that there is course material always added each as we go through things. I will sometimes even add content there. We will be doing discussions and blogs so that we can interact with each other. The blogs being the first thing we're going to do, which are due today, and I'm looking forward to seeing them. So if you have questions, you can use the questions thing in the discussions, or you can contact me. And I look forward to reading your new blogs.